Welcome to the newest episode of the European Republic. And today I'm delighted to have one of my favorite upcoming Polish politicians on the show, the chairman of Astra Poland, an organization that's very close to my heart because I'm involved myself. Welcome, Bruno. I'm looking very much forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Nico. I'm really excited to be here. We've had some people from Poland come on the show, and I'm excited to give my own opinion, whether they're the same or completely opposite.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that very much because, as you said, I had two episodes with presidents of both Poland. And before we get into that and why you maybe joined Astra and not Volt, let's talk about your background and your motivation to become active in pro-European politics, especially looking at Poland. This is not necessarily the most popular political camp right now.
Yeah, for sure. How I see it, right, is I don't really have a story that I can tell you about why I decided to, be in politics, why I wanted to be active, why I wanted, to be in the European federalist kind of sphere. Uh, And I think that's okay. I think I come from a generation that is a bit younger and where we don't need a story anymore. I think that a lot more people my age have already been brought up as Europeans, obviously still as Poles, as French, as whatever. But with that European like layer already added on, we didn't need to, go on Erasmus and discover it kind of the old way, maybe. But yeah, my background. So I am a student of social and public policy at the University of Warsaw, the best university in Poland. And yeah, so I have some experience with, let's say, politics from the other side, where we, we like to say we don't cause problems, we solve them. But obviously, we all know that sometimes policymaking can also be patchy. So I think that that's kind of what drove me into politics, was being in the policy sphere and seeing really good policy be made and be really well received by the people, only to then be kind of ruined by politicians who would only cherry pick the ideological parts of a whole policy and then actually have a very negative impact on our country or our continent in general.
Mhm. Right. Do you have like an example for that where you would say this was a great policy idea, but the execution by, let's say, the Polish government was just very bad?
Well, I mean, we have the entirety of modern Polish history is that, but most famously, right, we did some liberal reforms, which were very good after we erased, cast out, and destroyed communism. But there was a lot of pouring out the baby with the bathwater that
Hmm.
happened. I think that our entire constitution was originally written in a, let's say, very good way. It had a lot of checks and balances. It had a lot of balance. And then, different politicians who are still very respectable and who've done great things for the nation, through their drive to, have more power to do better things, they created what I like to refer to as a compromise constitution, where we don't actually have a parliamentary system or a presidential system or a chancellorial system like you in Germany, but we have a little bit of a mix that only works if everyone plays by the rules that are not actually written down anywhere. Right. I
Hmm.
think that is kind of a big, big problem that stems from the way that politics are being done nowadays compared to maybe before the war, before communism, where politics were a bit more long term. And they have now transferred into a very short term electoral racing and like power grabbing, because if you don't grab the power, you're out in max 15 years for a lot of positions. So it incentivizes, these power grabbing mechanics that we saw in in Hungary, especially, but they are also being done in Poland by one of our parties. They're being done, I'm sure, in many other places.
Mm.
So yeah.
In my understanding, there's also a big factor that despite getting rid of communism, Poland still has a lot of government-owned companies, and a lot of like managerial positions of those companies are like selected by the government. So if you get into government, you can also give a lot of jobs and a lot of money basically to your friends and family. So that makes also, I think, the
Yes.
competition over power very fierce.
Yes. So I think that it's kind of again the case where we left a lot of things to the state, which could have been privatized or could have been left to the state, but we privatized basically all the companies that were doing badly under communist rule, that were public companies that could have remained public because the issue was rather that the communists were corrupt rather than the company being a failure. And within years of the government selling them cents on the euro, as one might say, then becoming actually very, very successful companies, giving very little benefit to the state because of the terms of the privatization. Of course, private companies are still great and we love that. But the way it's been done has been, again, more political than policy focused. What that means for me is that nobody actually sat down to look, okay, what will happen if we keep this company and we actually bring it back up to a state where there's no central planning and the company can actually produce the goods that it's good at producing, the goods they're selling. And instead of doing that, we just went out and said, all the companies will no longer be public and we'll do all these big reforms because it sells politically. But again, that's not what people want in the end.
Hmm.
Yes, advertising something politically is very good, but then people actually care about the results in 5 years, in 10 years for their children, even rather than the political slogans now, even though that might grab more attention, that might be more emotional. In the end, we all want a better place to live tomorrow than yesterday, right?
Hmm. So looking at Poland, one can say, even if not everything was ideal policy-wise, and there have been some constitutional crises, especially with his his government, Poland overall is doing well, and every year even better, especially the big cities. So, would you
Yes.
say Poland could be even more successful than it is in improving its circumstances?
I mean, absolutely. We are, the success child of Europe. It is like the success story of the world now, right? Because the other maybe country that's like been said to grow at such an exponential rate are, some African countries, sure, but China is an example, right? But that is a superpower, right? And also that is built on a lot of unethical maybe practices that we don't really accept in Europe. So to have Poland, which is still a welfare state, it's still a protective state, and it retains all the protections, all the, unions and all of that while continuing to grow and to grow at a insane rate, frankly. I mean, I am very young, but even I remember Poland 10 years ago, and that is completely different than how it is nowadays, especially Warsaw, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but what I think about that is how can we translate this success not only to the rest of Europe, but also how do we keep this model? How do we improve on the model itself without relying on EU aid? Because EU has pumped a lot of money into Poland, right?
Hmm.
And at some point, it will potentially be better for Poland to start being a net contributor in many years, not right now, but in many years to be a net contributor to the EU, to replicate our success to all our neighbors so that we have a stronger neighborhood and a stronger Europe that will then, give back into Poland And that is not an ideological thing, even though I have a lot of, ideological love for Europe. This is a very pragmatic thing to say. If you are, a Polish nationalist, you should aim for Poland to stay in the EU and help other countries grow because it benefits all of us in the end, right?
Yeah. Especially economically, investing in your neighboring countries usually helps your own economy and lift the entirety of Europe up. I mean, that's also why Germany and France are putting so much money, I think, into the EU. It's also calculated benefit because Germany, for example, profits massively from Poland's economic rise because it means more Poles are buying the BMWs and so on, for example. So I agree a lot. But the question here is a little bit, what is like your concrete vision of Poland in Europe, like in the long term? Because we are talking here not on this podcast and with Astra, not only
Mhm.
about staying in the union, but also integrating even more. And I think staying also in the union is a very popular position in Poland, but like integrating
Yes.
further, getting the euro, getting a European military, these are really contested issues, and they're not as, I think, obvious mainstream positions. So that would be now interesting. Where do you say should Poland head in the sense of European integration, federation, and how much is realistically possible in the upcoming years?
Right. So let's start by dispelling I think, common misconception here that Poland is becoming less aligned with Europe. I think that's a rhetoric that has been kind of in the media a little bit, especially on social media, but also just something you might hear maybe other people on this podcast say, right? That because we had a lot of disagreements recently with the European Union as a state,
Hmm.
it can kind of feel as if people are liking Europe less, which is completely not true. The support for the European Union and like for generally existing remaining in the EU is about the same right now within statistical error of how it has been when we joined the union. On the referendum to join, this has remained basically at the stable level to today. There has been ups and downs, but today and 2004 is almost the same.
Hmm.
Now it's almost the same because it's really high, right? It's over 75%. We love Europe, but you're right that there is some points of contention with further integration. I think a lot of that comes from certain specific issues with how the process is being done rather than with the idea itself.
Hmm.
I think that a lot of pressure has been put on Poland regarding our migration stance. I think we'll talk about migration more later. I don't want to jump the gun here, but that has been something that, our ruling coalition has been pushing back on. So the migration pact and how Poland can alter the pact for itself a little bit because we have very little migration right now. We mostly have secondary migration from the EU and obviously Ukraine but it's really a separate issue that I wouldn't put into one box with migration.
Hmm.
So our government is pushing back on that, and it makes it seem like we don't like the EU because there is some conflicts, there are some arguments. But in the end, I think we're not pushing to have less integration, but just to do integration better on better terms and in a way that will benefit everyone more than kind of sticking to the current model because the times have changed, right? It is no longer, 2004. We're no longer in this conception that there will be peace forever and that Europe and democracy is kind of the ultimate goal also for the rest of the world. We were maybe thinking that everyone else will become like Europe because it's great here. So we thought, everyone else will also want it to be great over there. But it seems that there's a lot of countries in Africa and Asia and the Middle East, in America now, that are kind of rejecting our democratic model and going on their own way. And I think that we need to adjust to that. And I think that while Poland maybe doesn't have the perfect rhetoric, it does have the right way of reform while strengthening integration. Because right, we're pushing back on migration, we're pushing back on a few things, but Poland is also joining a lot of opt-in programs of Europe, right? The E6, right? Poland opts in for integrated defense. Poland is, well, obviously not a champion because we're not, again, that's a net contributor, so it's hard to champion it, but we are one of the biggest advocates, right, for joint defense spending. And still, through, all of the conflicts with Ukraine that have a historical context from Poland, we are still pushing very hard for Europe to stand up for Ukraine and to push back against Russia.
Yeah.
So to kind of go back to your question, because I'm maybe going a bit far. Yes, the place of Poland is further integration, but for that we need to change how we integrate, and we need to integrate more aggressively together. We need to accept that we have to make some sacrifices. We have to accept that certain values we hold have to kind of subside to other values we hold, right? We need to make difficult decisions. We need to make hard choices, and we need to sacrifice even on the things that are important to us to ensure that we stick together and that we don't leave anybody behind.
Yeah. hmm But now, for someone listening who is maybe not as convinced that Poland should integrate further in the EU, what would you say are like the most important reasons why Poland should integrate more and maybe even join a European Federation in the future? Because, as I said, you are from a younger generation that's already maybe shaped in a European way, but that's not the case for everyone. So, what are for you the most pressing reasons or best arguments for further European integration?
Sure. So there are two arguments that I always say. There's like a conversation starter at this point. It's take a photo from an album, from an old album, and see what Poland was like 30 years before, or 20 years before, or 10 years before, or last year, and it's better, right? So
Yeah.
every year we are getting better. And this is on every level proven, scientifically proven to be connected to our European integration and to how much support we receive. So this is obviously the easy economic answer is Europe makes our country better and our lives better. There is a
hmm
second simple answer, which is look that way. East is over there, and we have some neighbors like Russia. I mean, we have one neighbor like Russia. Okay. There is no one else like that. But we take a look at that and you see that, that is a giant country that is actively imperialist that wants to take our lands, right?
Yeah.
And sure, there is people in Poland who will say Russia could be an ally, or maybe even not an ally, but they would never attack. Putin said he would never attack the EU, right? First off, he said he would never attack the EU. So if we leave, oops, okay, we don't know. But also, who trusts that guy, right?
Yeah. He also
Like,
said to
are we
never attack
trusting?
Crimea.
Yeah, I mean, he promised a lot of things, and listening to the promises of a KGB officer, we've tried that in Poland. A lot of people tried that. Generally, doesn't end up great for them. So those are like very simple reasons that are surface level that I think are the most important reasons for people who maybe are not interested a lot in politics, who don't really
hmm
care also about how the country is governed, and they basically want the government to leave them alone, right? People who just want to live in their own way without any interference. I think those are the best reasons. But I think there is a much larger kind of underlying condition of being in Europe, and that's progress, right? That on so many levels, Europe kind of enforces on its states that they keep growing.
Mhm.
We have certain mechanisms that are fail safes in Europe. You can't, as a European country, fail, right? Obviously, there are hurdles and there are big mishaps like Greece, not now, but historically, where bad decisions led to bad outcomes. But we can imagine a economic catastrophe at the level that happened in Greece to happen to a country that's not in the EU. That's not something they recover in a few years. There are countries that had these economic disasters happen in South America, in Asia, that are recovering for decades upon decades, and other countries that are simply existing, right? Europe is, as the Union, a driver of change
Mhm.
in a positive way, right? You can just stop doing things. I think this is something that we internalized a lot in Poland that we have to keep growing. We have to keep building. We have to keep getting better because if we don't, then why are we asking for things from the others, right? If the things that everyone's doing for us aren't making us better, why do they need to keep giving us the things? And this goes both ways, right? We expect every other European country to also grow and to become better and to fix their problems because we are in a partnership, right? We are in a union, in a historical sense, a marriage of states, right? And a foundation of a good marriage is that you both grow together and you help each other. And for anyone who wants to see Poland grow, this is the best and the most sure way to do it because
Mhm.
no one else will push us to be better like this. The United States might, protect us militarily. I'm sure anyone else could offer us that many deals. China could build for us so many power plants in Poland, but they won't actually drive our people and our companies and our governments over the years to actually try to build a better country.
Mhm. But now, to play a little bit with devil's advocate, one could argue of two things. First, that sure, Poland benefits massively from the EU and from the especially economic integration, but and also from the joint defense programs that are starting now. But why should Poland integrate further? Where it isn't obvious that further integration should always lead to more economic benefits. And the second point, I would challenge you a little bit. Not that I believe that myself, but just for argument's sake, getting, especially in Poland, I think many people care a lot about national sovereignty, especially looking at the history of Russia and Germany and Austrian imperialism dividing up the country for hundreds of years, uh, and the history of world wars and the Second World War and the Cold War, where Poland was for a long stretch occupied by Russia directly and indirectly. So many people are very skeptical of like giving up sovereignty to another supranational body like the EU. How would you reply to these two like counter arguments? I think you would hear in Poland quite often.
Sure. I would just say that sovereignty is not real. It's a fake story you have been sold. There is to the people of Poland, you do not stand a chance of keeping our sovereignty if we don't have Europe basically backing it, right? Because nobody will let us be sovereign. We are a small state. Yes, maybe big on a European scale, but if you zoom out on the map, on your Google Maps, if you zoom out all the way, you can barely see us, right? So the idea that, in the world of hegemonies with Trump trying to enforce his will and build a even more America-centric world through the America First reforms, with China encroaching into Europe. We've had, our members of parliament, members of European Parliament, proven to take bribes from the Chinese corporations. which are obviously linked to the state in the case of China, right? I think a lot of people are scared to say this, that when a Chinese corporation is bribing our officials, that's China, right? Similarly, we have threats, right? We have Russia that is actively a threat, as well as, and a lot of people will be mad at this, but the Middle East, right? The theocratic regimes that actively say all of Europe must be Muslim at some point, that we will be conquered, because it's not the right wing thing to say, because it's what they say, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to Muslims who live here, it doesn't apply to citizens of these nations, but the regimes that often took power militarily, they are not friendly to us in Poland. We have had issues with our eastern border being the hybrid warfare on our eastern border being used, let's say, by these theocratic states, by these terror groups, to try to further destabilize the eastern flank of Europe or Poland. And we are very fortunate to have very, very good border services now. They weren't always this way, but our our guys came a long way. We gave a lot of money into this. We really built up from the ground up a system that keeps us safe. But going back, kind of having painted the picture of why we can't defend ourselves alone, without further integration, I believe, and I think most people, if they look into their heart, they will know it to be true, Europe will deteriorate. We cannot keep Schengen the way it is. And we've seen it. Schengen already is suspended on a lot of borders. I was recently coming to Germany, and people were arrested on the bus that were with me for having their visa expired, right? And that's good, because they were breaking the law and they got arrested. The thing is, they should have been arrested when they came to Poland improperly, not when they tried to cross into Germany. And that is something that, for me, is very representative, right? That if we don't strengthen Schengen outside, it will deteriorate inside. And now I soon will have to do a border check coming into Germany, even though we already established that the Poles are not the problem, right? And that the
Yeah.
people who are breaking Schengen are coming from outside. And this is true for all the other deals. This is the same with Euro. Euro was meant to be expanding into other European countries, and we need to finish the Euro project, because if we don't, that is now bad for all the economies that are not only that have Euro, but that are connected to the economies with Europe, like Poland. If Germany sneezes, Poland catches a cold, right? We cannot exist without what we have right now, and we can't keep what we have right now without expanding eventually into a federation.
Yeah. I very much agree here. And also this geopolitical aspect that Europe is nowadays facing the threat of basically being divided and colonized and deteriorate by Russian imperialism, by more and more imperial and selfish America, and also unpredictable America, and also the Islamist and theocratic networks like we have Iran, we have the Muslim Brotherhood, who try to spread Islamism to Europe. And this is also one of the forces that is like undermining currently Schengen. Just as we speak right now, on Sunday, the 26th of July, unfortunately, yesterday there was an Islamist terror attack in Berlin on the Christopher Street Day celebrations there on the CSD. And now, currently, the borders between the neighboring countries to Germany are closed again because of not closed completely, but Schengen is like temporarily suspended because the police is controlling whether the person, the perpetrator, which is an Islamist who escaped, is trying to leave Germany. And we see like if we don't protect our outer borders, we don't like combat Islamist networks, Russia, or also, for that sake, Russian hybrid warfare and Russian spy networks, our internal security and internal freedoms, they deteriorate. But that's also one of the issues that I think are very contested in the Euro-federalist space, because especially among the people who are for more European integration, more European Union, we have a lot of more left-leaning organizations like JEF or Volt Europe that often more on the side of like keep European borders open and don't be too critical of, let's say, Islamist networks, or they don't take that threat as so serious. What's your take on it? And maybe that's also a good like starting point to talk why you are active in Astra and not, for example, in Volt.
Right. So I think, unfortunately, what you're saying is very true, that not only the European federalist space is kind of dominated by left wing, let's not kind of hide from that, groups, but I think also, unfortunately, the whole idea right now of Eurofederalism speaks to people as a left wing idea. So meeting especially people in the policy space, in political science space, that are not politicians, but rather professors, even people who are writing about European integration, they are very surprised to hear that I want to approach a not left-wing, let's say, audience with federalism. I think it shocks people almost that how big, but that's a left-wing idea. Why would you even try that? That's absurd. Is kind of what I hear often, obviously not in those direct words, but in the expressions. So let me start to kind of maybe say to all the Volt people who might watch this, I love Volt, right? You guys are great and you are valid. It's just not okay to have only one party driving a social change that is the largest social change, I think, from nation state to European Federation. Largest change since the fall of monarchy, since radicalism, since the first like workers' rights movements. I think that is the scale of the idea that we are presenting, and making it a partisan issue that is, left or right or something like this, which are already terms that I honestly quite despise. And I really wish we could not use them, but I feel like it's hard to reach people without using them. So I love that we have Volt in Poland. I I consider the people who run Volt Poland to be friends of mine. I hope they feel the same way about me. But I just don't feel comfortable. You know, one thing personally, I don't agree with a lot of things that Volt represents beyond federalism. I think migration obviously being one thing, and certain other issues. Volt had, their own troubles that I don't think we should talk about here today, but anyone who's in the bubble will know, and anyone who's not in the bubble is not worth knowing about.
Oh, they can find out very
So,
quickly, yeah, especially in Germany. The
yes,
news were full with that the last 2 years.
yes. So for me, I just wasn't like that comfortable with Volt, and I would want to have something more close to my heart.
Hmm.
And more pragmatically, I don't think Volt has in Poland enough, let's say, reach, and they have too many limitations on the reach to be the driving force that will introduce the idea of federalism to Poland. It's not about winning elections, right? Nobody here wants to be a career politician who gets paid money to sit and deliberate on things that will then not be decided by them. But it's not the point. Nobody is here for the power and the money. We are here to introduce the idea of federalism into Poland, because most people have never heard of federalism in Poland. They don't understand the core ideals. They don't understand, maybe, well, not understand, because they would understand if you told them, right? But they just never heard of it. It's not in the conversation. And I think that Volt is great for Western Europe. In a lot of places, they have support in the left wing sphere, and they consider, I think, a lot of things centrist or pragmatic that in Poland are still a very politicized issue. They, have a rainbow logo. They support Palestine very openly and loudly. And those are, left wing issues that in Poland are not so decided, especially, trans rights, gay marriage, etc., which I am a big proponent of gay marriage, but it's not something that every party must talk about, right? The voters, the people who are citizens of our nation, they are not stupid, right? They make up their own mind on issues. And sure, you can manipulate, you can lie. We've tried it, but in the end, if people don't like your ideas, you lose the elections, right? This is what happened to peace. They got into power and everyone was so worried because they could cheat, because they were, bending the law, attacking the constitutional order. But in the end, they tried to ban abortion, and that was the stepping stone of which people just said, no, we don't want that, and they voted them out, right? You can't force people to like something they don't like. And so to reach people about federalism that I believe they do like, you can't talk about those partisan, I like to call them partisan issues, that real people don't go to vote about this, right? Real people go to vote because they want their children to go to a good school, they want a good education system, they want good rent when they're older, they want their apartment to remain theirs at a good price. They don't care about these issues that are so blown up on the internet, right? That if you go on TikTok, or I don't have TikTok, but I assume it's the same. If you go on Instagram, if you go on Facebook, people are constantly talking about things that are not real. People are talking about all the culture war stuff. But if you actually go out to people and you ask, what is the most important thing to you on the street? 90% of people will not talk about all these culture things. They care about daily life. And yes, I understand and I really sympathize that a lot of these rights that the left is fighting for is the daily lives for people, right? But that can't be a driving force of a party that's meant to be a federalist party. Because it can be a driving force for a left-wing party or a, let's say, centrist party with these leanings for the cultural freedoms of people. But that's not what we're trying to do. The main goal has to be federalize Europe. And if we start to make compromises on that, it won't work. Yes, politics, I think politics are about sacrifice, about compromise, but that's what I'm doing. I'm sacrificing the other issues. I'm compromising on everything else to not compromise on the federation. And I just don't see that conviction in Volt always. I see it often, but not always. And that's important. It's really important that it's always, because one slip can give way to these anti-European forces to kind of crack at our rock, at our wall that we are trying to push forward.
I agree very much with this assessment. I also have a lot of friends, I would say, on Volt across the continent, and I admire what they did and built for European federalism with a first really somewhat successful party that's pan-European. But as you said, Eurofederalism should be the highest priority. And at this point, I know also a lot of people are involved, even at national chapter presidency or board positions, who quite obviously care less about European federalism than they care about, how do we say it, this epitome of millennial, yuppie, left-wing identitarian virtue signaling, posting selfies with Greta Thunberg in 2026. pro-Palestine rallies is more important than pushing forwards European army or European rearmament. So, or even protecting Ukraine against Russian imperialism. So that's, I think, a problem that Volt faces is that they're like getting hijacked by this millennial-like left-wing identitarianism. And I sometimes joke there are too many like people in it that try to LARP New York Democrats in the middle of
Yes.
Berlin. So that's also why I'm not involved in Volt myself, and why we also together founded Astra Poland and Astra Europa. So maybe that's also a good point now to start talking a bit more about Astra and your presidency and your goals for organization.
Right. So I think the goal right now is to grow, right? We recently managed to tie off all the loose ends bureaucratically to be an association. It took us quite a while. We are volunteers, nobody's getting paid to do this, and everyone has jobs, right? There's no career politicians involved. And our goal, a stated goal, I think, in our charters is to make Europe a superpower. And that sounds very nice. But what it comes down to, I think, for Poland is what I said, introducing the idea into the mainstream. For me, an ideal situation is in a few years, let's say during the 2029 European parliamentaries, I would like to see every candidate from Poland say their stance on the issue. I don't think it's okay to have what we have right now, which is people who run for EU Parliament only to get, in some cases, literally only to get immunity for their crimes, which has happened, which is insane. As a voter, that is insane to me that we can allow that, right? And people who have zero interest in Europe, because there are people who run and they say, I want to go into European Parliament to destroy it. And that's okay, right? Because you're being honest with your constituency. And if you are being voted in to destroy Europe, that's fine. That's democracy, right? Again, we have to make sacrifices. I don't love that. I don't love that people do this, but I accept it. What I don't accept is people who candidate on issues that the European Parliament doesn't have jurisdiction over. They candidate on a popularity contest against another party in their town. In Warsaw, you have two people running against each other and they never talk about the union, let's say, and they only insult each other and their parties, and it's a popularity contest. And for me, in 2029, if I was to have everything I want, obviously every party wants to win. If I was, to sit in European Parliament 2029, I wouldn't say no, right? I don't think anyone in the space, any activist would refuse an offer like that to really realize all their ideas. But beyond that, for me, every candidate declaring their stance on European integration, whether that be, removal, exit, whatever, whether that be status quo, whether that be full federation, unitary state, whether that be multi-speed Europe, whether that be slow integration. I think that people deserve to know what you think when you're a candidate. And if you want their votes, I think we need to have a culture, and I will push for that by, if I ever meet an MP on TV again, or if I go on a podcast with one, I ask them, right? Will you vote if you were in European Parliament? Would you vote for these further integration issues? If you are, as a Polish citizen, given a referendum on federalization, how would you vote? Right? This is, for me, the most important part: pushing the issue, forcing these politicians who are there for many issues, many reasons. Some are good, some are bad, to actually declare their interests, to actually declare what they think, and by that to make people ask themselves, do I want a federation? To actually explore the idea, because like I said, voters aren't stupid, right? They will make up their own mind based on facts and feelings that they have,
Mhm.
and they will by themselves decide if they want a federation. But they need to be given a fair choice, because right now there's no choice. Nobody told people that this is even being discussed. You have countries where federalizing the union polls above 60%. You know, yes, there is some contention. Some people are saying those polls are not phrased very well. And it might be, maybe 50%, not 60, not 70. It doesn't matter, because in Poland, nobody has even heard of this. And this is very problematic. We cannot let Europe federalize without Poland, not only for Poland's sake, but because it would be a huge blow to the eastern flank of Europe, to the way we see the European order, to even to the world order, right?
Yeah.
So this is the goal. How do we want to achieve this? Unless you have some questions, you can feel free to interrupt me.
No, I'll keep on yapping. I have some questions, but I will just store them in the back of my head and
Okay.
send them at the end. But
So
I
so
think you're on
how
a good
how
track.
do we achieve this? Right? Because everyone can have dreams, but we need to realize them. So I will say first, recruit, 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 grow, 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 get donations, right? Obviously, we want to put up posters, we want to host events. That is costly, but that is not only costly in zlotys or euros, but also in man hours, right? We need people who are dedicated. So you can find me on any social media or apply through the website. We'll talk about that at the end also, but short plugin, beyond growth. And this might be a bit controversial, but we need to cooperate with Volt. We need to every day talk to Volt. I used to talk almost daily with Uliana when we were together hosting the We Are Europe protests. And I believe we didn't speak in quite a while, since maybe June. I would really like to get that cooperation going. So Uliana, if you're watching this, give me a call. We'll find some things to do again. But jokes aside, Volt is not perfect for me, and Astra won't be perfect for many, many people. That's okay. But we are not Germany, we are not France, we are not Italy, we are not a country where federalization is a topic, and we just need to stick together, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much Volt will squabble in another country. And, maybe it will be very controversial for Volt to even do things with me because I'm not agreeing with their views. It could be. But I think that, again, it's about sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
We as Astra need them, but I also really think they do need us. So that is a cornerstone of how I view Polish federalism as a cooperative, right? As something that nobody can do alone. If the winds turn, if Poland becomes an immensely federalist country, I don't expect it, but I would love it. I see myself on one list, on one electoral list with Maciek and with Rihanna from Polish Vote. I have no problems with that, even though we disagree on a lot of issues, as long as we put Europe first, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's something to be seen from what I heard from different voters. I think we all benefit from growing the ecosystem, and because we have different approaches to European federalism, it's a win-win situation, especially with things like We Are Europe, where we can cooperate and so on and spread the Eurofederalist idea. There's a lot of benefit in that, especially in Poland. And we have already worked together, as you said, at the We Are Europe demonstrations. But and also in elections in Poland, you can have joint lists. That's a possibility. Well, Well, let's see. There's also always possibility that like
Right.
Volt will instead
I will
ally
kind
with
of
more left-wing
intercept if
parties. Yeah.
I will intercept a little bit about the electoral list, right? This I don't want this to be taken as a promise of candidacy, especially in 2027. This is an ongoing discussion. I personally think that as federalists, we should, in the upcoming 2027 elections in Poland, support all candidates that are pro-European. Because this is such a contested issue, we need to push Europeanism and we need to push being pro-European among the candidates, and we need to promote the candidates that are pro-European, especially those that are federalists. We have a few federalists in Poland, but they're mostly in the closet. They don't like to advertise it, but I'll advertise it for them. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, our newly formed party leader of New Wave, Professor Senyshyn, also a declared federalist, as well as some government members such as Danuta Huber or Róża Thun. Big call outs to you guys. Enjoy the support. I hope that they will, some of them at least, will run on that in 2029. But in 2027, national elections, I think Volt and Astra should be in a association supportive role over running an election, which doesn't mean you won't see anyone from our associations on political lists. I would love to put out candidates, I'm sure, as would Volt. Logistically speaking, it's more realistic. We will have maybe our candidates on party lists from another group, or maybe as independent, maybe we'll just support other candidates. Maybe we'll have a candidate who joins. It's not uncommon to have, these independent candidates finally find a home with a newly established party. So I'm also open to anyone in local politics, anyone in local government to reach out and, cooperate or join. I'm sure we can accommodate a lot of local needs, right? In Astra Poland, in our domestic policy. So I hope we will get to have more and more people so that we can run in 2029. But I wanted to reiterate that I don't think 2027 is a realistic date for European federalists to run in national elections next year. That's it.
Mm-hmm. I think things, looking at how things are going, probably Astra will run properly for its first time in 2029, as you just said, the European elections. But also the next year, the 2027 Polish elections. I mean, it's still over a year, 14 months, I think, October 2027.
Yes, it's about a year with change.
Yeah, will be quite interesting, especially as the Polish political landscape is also rapidly changing. We had just yesterday or 2 days ago, a PiS breaking up between Morawiecki and Kaczynski.
Yes, we are cautiously excited. So yes, I mean the Polish scene is it was always, I think that people talk that we have these two main parties. It's a duopoly on politics, but I think we're always a bit dynamic because it's not in every country that almost every election there's a new party that gets into parliament that wasn't in parliament before, ever, and that is almost always the case in Poland. We have those parties that form and they jump into the elections with this bang. And that I think is good because it keeps also politics exciting. It keeps people peeled to the news, which is a cornerstone of democracy in and of itself. But this election will be very special, not only because of the peace breakup, which we'll see if it holds. I think it will. Others are less convinced on if it's real, if there won't be some reconciliation later, if it's not a way to grab more votes into the right from the center, basically. I don't think so. I think, Prezes Kaczyński, the leader of the Law and Justice Party, is very old now. I think it's not unrealistic that he lost support and that his decision have led to the more centrist, less identitarian, let's say, less dangerous, in my opinion, faction splitting off after the decisions to, open conversations with some far right parties on approaching elections together next year. I also think that that's not the only reason. I think I've already mentioned that. It's not the only reason why will be interesting. The second reason is how many parties have registered for this election. I mean, have formed to run in this election. We have Mr. Morawiecki's new parliamentary group that we all expect to transition into a party called Progress. We have
Hmm.
Club Center, which is another fraction of MPs. I believe there's a dozen or more. They're sitting currently in parliament. They have split off from their party, hoping to start what they called center, and they intended to be a blue and green, so conservative, ecological party, centrist kind of group. They also, I imagine, intend to run in elections. We have my personal favorite that I hold a lot of sympathy for, which is New Wave, where the leader is a federalist. We are yet to see the program, and we are yet to see if that sentiment will translate into European integration as part of the policy. Although I do believe Professor Seneshin has called for the introduction of euro in Poland when possible. And I believe that is a party line, although I'm not 100% certain. There
Hmm.
is also multiple right-wing parties forming, although there's New Poland, which is a center to right, I understand, party, which we still don't know that much about. It's meant to be a small business, local politics party with conservative views, as well as some others that might form but have not been announced yet from other splits inside parties. So I think we're looking at a really interesting shakeup of Polish politics. The previous presidential election have shown how the two main parties have dwindled in support. And I really think we can have a transition back into a very, very plural model with a lot more parties over what we have right now, which is edging on a two-party system where obviously we have a lot of parties in parliament, but they really are organized into these two strict coalitions, which is now informal coalitions. And that's how it's been for some years. Now I think that it's starting to be different. I think that we will see a lot more interest in politics thanks to this. I think that we will have a much larger voter frequency. And that is something that's very important to me and dear to my heart, that we do have more interest in politics and more care. Because, this is the same as in business, right? Competition does breed innovation. It does breed, better. It gives us better outcomes if we're competing, right? So being there two parties, of which I consider the ruling coalition to be stale. I do think they have a lot of issues, but I don't have a necessarily very bad opinion of them. While Law and Justice, I consider a kleptocracy. I think that if given the chance, they would form an illiberal democracy in the likes of Hungary, which would
I mean, that's
only
right.
serve to take money away from the system and into the pockets of private individuals connected to the party. We have already seen those tendencies before, especially during COVID, where lives were lost because deals were not made properly. And we have bought medical equipment from friends or associates of politicians that have then not arrived or arrived in a condition that was not suitable for use in medical care. So there is a cost in lives to illiberal democracy and to kleptocracy. And I really hope that with these many new parties coming into view, this will end the bad spell of populism, and it will banish the idea of a liberal democracy. It will banish kleptocracy away from the Polish sphere for decades to come. That is my true and honest hope.
That's, I hope I share. For one must say that the right-wing authoritarian populist forces in Poland are quite strong, unfortunately. I mean, you have not only PiS, you have also Konfederacja, and PiS already did quite a lot of damage in its previous rule, and still the damages, I think, are not completely like reversed, especially because we have a president that vetoes a lot of things. I think the opposition even the government even made a website, I think, where they track all his vetoes. I remember seeing something like
Yeah,
that.
the veto machine is a problem, but I really blame this on the ruling party. I think they were overconfident in the elections. They thought they can promise nothing and get everything. They really did not do a good job promoting their candidates. They were more focused on. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this in your podcast, but you will bleep me if I can't. Frankly, it was a dick measuring contest. Different
You can
fractions
say that.
within the coalition were trying to prove how much support they have instead of coming together and trying to make Poland better. Instead of putting out one candidate, everyone had to really push their own guy uh, up to a point of not the candidate of the leftmost fraction that is now no longer in the coalition, but that have been in government before, simply not even supporting the left wing or not or the coalition candidate in the second turn where their candidate has already not been qualified. So in the race between men accused of multiple crimes who refused to be tried under election tribunal, which would be an expedited process, which would determine his guilt or what he claims innocence before the day of voting. He refused to do that for multiple crimes, including soliciting illegally taking an apartment from an elderly man, which is still an ongoing basically case. But they, in the choice between a man not only accused of crime, but simply in full contrast to their views of, this is a man who does not want gay marriage, who is softly Eurosceptic, who is not aligned with the values of a left wing party. And he is in a race against a guy who is kind of a centrist, left leaning centrist, just a guy goes to pride parades, maybe he's doing it only for political support and he doesn't really believe it. Nobody knows. And a far left party doesn't support either of the candidates because they say, actually, we don't feel closer to anyone. And the people who voted for their candidate in the first turn actually split quite equally. Well, not equally, but they split off a lot of people to the right. And I'm not saying that's why KO lost the election. There has been many, many more factors. And with, such a tiny vote difference of below 1%, that one thing could have changed the outcome and 1,000 other one things could have changed the outcome. But I think it shows a very infantile view of politics from a lot of our parties where they just do not care necessarily for well-being of the people in a long-term sense rather than scoring points here and now
Hmm.
especially over the people on their own side of the political landscape. The right is usually hitting the right and the left is hitting the left, and they're just in this kind of masochistic, in my opinion, which I think it pushes people away from politics. I think that it makes people uninterested, like normal people, right? Who are not either chronically online or like super invested or politicians themselves. I think it's very discouraging for normal people.
Yeah, definitely. But that's also, I think, an issue of, what also Jonathan Haidt calls a conservative advantage, that I think the political right is way better at rallying around the flag and uniting often behind one candidate, while the more left-leaning liberal forces split more often, which makes probably strategic voting. I mean, that's one of the issues of democracy. If you start to vote strategically, it really like distorts also the preferences, and at the end, you might get suboptimal outcomes. But if you don't do it, you can also get suboptimal outcomes. It's a tough place to be, but at least with dynamism, the elections will be very interesting as we get more parties. Yeah.
Well, I mean, another kind of layer to that is when we eventually have a European Federation, right? Because this is what the show is about. We will have to find a way of setting up an electoral system, right?
Yeah.
And I personally am a firm believer in low mandates, right? So that a smaller parties should still be, in my opinion, able to get them. I think 5% in Poland for parties, 8 for coalitions is much too much, especially having as many seats in parliament as Poland does. I don't see why we couldn't have a smaller mandate for parties and why we couldn't have subventions from a lower point, because concentrating all the subventions, so money for political parties, in the biggest winners is obviously fair in some way, but there also needs to be a way to help new ideas grow. Because in an ideal world for me, you and I will one day be old. We will be
I hope
those
not.
80-year-old, 90-year-old, maybe, science is progressing, maybe we'll be 110. And we'll sit there having built our federation and we'll complain these new kids have some idea of changing the great system that we built that we find absurd. But we need to build the world in a way where our kids will be able to take it away from us, right? This is something that has not been done by previous generations, and it's something that we have to do when we build our world.
Yeah, to build it actually in a way that it can be improved upon in the future. Which is also a tricky thing because, I mean, it can also always get worse.
Yeah, but we as Europe, we are a continent of stability for sure. The way we do things is we test everything 100 times before we try it. And it has its benefits, right? We don't want, unregulated corporations like in America. We don't want government overreach on clinical trials. We've recently had reports coming out of China of a girl's death being concealed after basically some genetic trials, which is far too scientific for me, from my understanding. But they did medical trials. A girl died, and it was hidden from the public that the treatment that she was receiving was deadly to her. Right? We don't want that in Europe, but we need to learn to take risks a bit more often, because there are issues such as AI where we cannot simply wait until we know what's the best solution and then implement it.
Yeah.
Because by the time the best solution becomes apparent, it will be far too late to use it. We need to find European ways to have advancement and risk taking done in a way that fits our culture and our systems. So it's hard, and I think that this is something that politicians should really carefully discuss with policymakers, because it
Mhm.
is not a idealistic issue, right? It is not a culture issue. It is not something that the politicians must be involved in my opinion. It's something for experts to deliberate on and to, with the scientific method, find a way to implement. Nevertheless, we must find a way. I don't have the answer here. unfortunately, with me on this podcast. But I can promise that if I was ever elected, I would leave a lot more decisions up to experts. I think that we need more consultants in parliament. We need more professors that are not advising one party, but are instead advising the whole of parliament and are actually taken seriously,
Yeah.
because advocacy, non-political advocacy in parliament, I don't know how well it does outside of Poland. In Poland, famously, we have a photo where I believe a person in a wheelchair advocates against a bill that reforms some aid for disabled people, and an advocate for an NGO that supports wheelchair users came to the parliament to advocate against this, and there was maybe 2 dozen people in the audience. Right, a staggering, surely above 80% of parliament did not show up to hear the advocacy against the bill on the day the bill will be voted on. That is a disgrace. It's disgraceful in every possible way. And it's something that really bothered me. This was a long time ago. I was already in activism. I wasn't as much in politics, let's say, but it really struck me then, because so many of the people that didn't show up that day were running their campaigns on saying how people don't show up and how they will do better and how the system is corrupt and they're going in and they're going to change it. And they just completely submit to the culture. And I don't know why that is. I don't understand if it's greed, because we don't pay our parliamentaries, in my opinion, it's good money, but it's not life changing to become a parliamentary. It doesn't make you a millionaire, right? It uplifts you socially, for sure. I appreciate that, but it's disgusting to me that people would run, and I don't want to believe that people do run just for the money. And so I struggle to view these people who candidate on doing something and then just turn around and don't do it. For me, that should be by the public. I don't think we need a system for this. I want to say that, but I think the public should decimate the careers of people who do this. I think that we don't have enough social campaigning during the elections, because of how the election funding is structured. In most of Europe, I believe the politicians are the only are the only ones, their party are the only ones who come out in support of themselves. There's very little social campaigning and support for people outside of, in Poland, the presidential elections, where there's, huge marches on either side. But I think we need to activate our civil society, right? We
Yeah.
need to really activize the social society to keep our politicians accountable, because that is the only way we will keep a European democratic system while reforming it into a better thing and not becoming a caricature of the US, which is, in my opinion, a very bad political system.
Yeah. That's, I think, in general, an issue with many post-Soviet countries or post-communist countries like Poland is that civil society engagement is comparatively low because it was suppressed for so long, and people often associate politics with being dirty and corrupt. And unfortunately, this is very circular, because if you don't engage in politics because you think it's dirty and corrupt, the people who will get into politics will be more likely the dirty and corrupt ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what we are trying to build with Astra, and you're also doing with Via Europe, is building up for European, federalist ecosystem and civil society in Poland, because it doesn't exist really. I think especially the traditional, more left-leaning federalist organizations like Jeff have single digit member counts.
Yes.
It's 5 people, 6.
I don't want to be mean. Yes. The last time I was talking to members of Jeff Poland, they did have 4 members. The Pan-European Union, I believe, also has about 5, but they're not cooperative. If they would ever watch this, call me. You have my number. I gave you my number. But yeah, they don't really want uh, help organize or even come to events. They were invited to some of our demonstrations as speakers, and they never showed up, which I think is a shame. Like, I don't understand really why you're a politician and then you don't want to do politics. Because I would understand if they're busy, but they're not doing their own events. And we organize something, we pay the money, right? We put hours into it, and we invite you. It would be so nice if you came. But yeah, I mean, if they want, we will find people who will, right? I think that's why we're making Astra, is to get people who are somehow disillusioned, but are trying to do something on their own to really give them a space to shine. Uh, but yes, I think that this is something that Poland has to work on. But I have high hopes. I think that Eurofederalism is the next big thing. I think we did not have a social movement with this much uh, support across the continent as we will have uh, as socialism. And I know that socialism is such a scary word, right? And that people react very negatively to it. And I'm not speaking to it about a system that formed, but as an idea that grew into a political movement in every European country that infiltrated every level of life, from what were then factory workers unionizing to the highest echelon of back then, aristocratic society. You had, aristocrats who believed they should give up power, who believed they will create a different society where there's no aristocracy. I think those movements were so big in such an unprecedented scale that they have not been beaten since on the continental scale. And I really think it can be us. I know it's a bit maybe inflammatory. I know that I am also speaking most likely to a bubble. Uh, Here, watching this podcast, I think it's mostly people who are interested already in Eurofederalism. But so, two people who watch this and who are Eurofederalists, our time is coming, right? We will be the big change. We will be how they said this, the specter that haunts the world, hopefully in a positive way. And I really don't see us failing. The question is, can we be fast enough to do it without sacrificing a lot? Because right now we can
Yeah.
federalize, sacrificing a little bit of a lot of things, of money, of effort, of potentially even some freedoms, unfortunately, for some time, like Schengen, right? But if we don't do it now, if we do it not in 10 years, but in 50 years, it will be at a grave, grave cost to the people of Europe. So I think I not only come on this show to say this, but in general, I think my role in the Eurofederal space is going to be, or is to try to push all people, regardless if they're in Astra, where I have, this direct influence, or if they're in any other party or any other group. If you're independent, if you don't want to be in a party, get active, right? Start going out, start doing things, run for your city, fight them for the EU grants, put up the EU flags on the post office, put up the EU flags on the public transport. These are all things that are at the bottom level, where anyone, and I really mean this, anyone with a little bit of energy and a little bit of, a lot of want, a little bit of energy and a lot of want, can get in and can start actually, building Europe from the ground up, because we don't need to win. Vote doesn't need to have 60% in parliament. Astra doesn't have to have 60% in parliament to make a federation happen. We need to have 3 or 5 or 8. And we need a lot of people on the ground really bringing the ideas to life as we go. Because there will never be a decree that we passed in parliament that every office, that every public building must have an EU flag on it. It will never happen. But you can make it happen in your town, right? And that's really something so important, not only to us, right, as Euro-federalists, but also to the people who just want a good life, because they might not know what to do, how to make their future better. I've seen this a lot, because it doesn't matter. The internet doesn't matter. The politicians don't really matter. But if you go to the people and you ask them, what they want, a lot of times people don't want issues to be fixed for them. You need to go to them and you need to tell them you have a way for them to help. People want to help you. People want to build their own better life by their own hands. And they just need a little bit of guidance and some help to organize together. And that is what politics should be. It should be helping people organize. It shouldn't be taking agency away from citizens and garnering power in some dusty or, usually maintained, actually, parliamentary rooms where 10 parliamentaries discuss something that is never made public. That is not politics. Politics is going out to people, and politics is getting people to change the world around them themselves.
Very well and very beautifully said. I agree with this very proactive sentiment. And I would also agree that obviously we are both biased, but also looking at the necessity of geopolitics, economics, and our history, European federalism will be, I think I'm very certain about it, the defining paradigmatic way of thinking of ideology in the 21st century for Europe, just as liberalism and socialism and nationalism transformed the continent away from feudalism towards today's democratic forms throughout the 18th, 19th, 20th century. I think we will see that European federalism will be as paradigmatic of a shift and a revolution as these movements were in the past, and as important for our progress. And I also agree with the sentiment that politics should be something that's bottom up, that has to be organized by the people, and it's not only just policy or backrooms. So, for people listening who want to get involved in Astra Europa, what's the best way? Who can get involved in Poland? How can they reach you?
So we do have a website, and actually within the days, it might be done by the time this comes out. I'm not sure. I believe our IT guy is off on vacation. He will be back on Monday. We will have a few more ways for you to reach us. We will put up a association phone on the website, so you can call us anytime, and that phone will be answered at any time of the day. Hopefully not the night, but if somebody has that much love for Europe that they want to call into Astra Europa at 3 a.m, we might accommodate that. There is already our email, I believe, on the website, and there is a sign-up sheet. So you can use any of those, or you can find me personally on any social media. All of my social media are public. I believe it's Bruno Topiński. It will be in the name of the episode, and we will also put
the links
some
down
links
below.
below. Yeah, the links down below, and hit that subscribe button. And then I think that we will be very happy to have anyone who wants to join us. But I am also looking for anyone who wants to collaborate, whether that be someone from Astra Poland coming to an event you host. If you want some support, logistically doing something, we can accommodate that. We can help you. We can, print flyers, print whatever, and help logistically. But also, if you are someone who is, let's say, a journalist or some sort of public figure, and you would like us to keep you in mind for when we host events. If you would like to ever, come speak at our events, come cooperate with us, you can send us an email, you can call us, and we will keep you in mind for the future.
Great. Yeah, I will also put all the links down below in the description. And I think we are at the end of our episode. Bruno, it was a great pleasure talking to you. Any final words to our audience?
Well, I had such a good ending sentence a few minutes ago. I don't think I can beat that, but I think if there's one thing that I can kind of leave this with is do it yourself, right? Voting is fun and voting is the most important thing we do in democracy, but you can get so much more done if instead of asking the politicians during elections, you do it now. Even if you are busy, just send an email to your local representative. If you're not busy, go out and really make the world a better place. Even if it's not for Europe, even if it's not federalist, if you have a patch of grass outside your home and you have a permit to plant flowers there, plant some flowers and make your city nicer. This is really, if all Europeans do this, we will be the greatest continent. We already are, maybe. I don't want to be like that, but we will be the prettiest and best and most bright place in the world. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come on your show and share my thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you for your very beautiful and inspiring words.